listening to The Watchers, a show where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch movies about
child abuse. Sorry. That, yeah. I fucked it up. But that's what it's about.
I don't know that I think the issue with you saying child abuse is that my response to it was to cackle. And so maybe our first thing in shouldn't be me laughing at child abuse.
I mean,
so have we established ourselves as the kind of people who can laugh at the phrase child abuse and people will know we don't actually think child abuse is funny? That we think that the absurdity of this movie is what we're laughing at?
I hope so. I think the fact that you chose this movie as one of the most meaningful movies of your childhood.
That's still true. That still feels
that
true.
We are the type of people that may have been a bit hardened by trauma to things like this. I literally said this to a friend of mine. I was like, oh, I think I get it. Like, I think I get why Andrea and I, if I had seen it at this age, would have been like, not really fazed by like.
There's one scene in this movie I was fazed by, and
the
from
dog?
your texts, I got the impression it was also the only scene you were fazed by.
Yes. Oh, Andrea, are you okay?
I'm fine.
Are you okay?
Here's what I'll say before we really jump into it is, as I was watching this movie, I was thinking about, oh no, that's what I was thinking about. You know what I mean? I was like, I like the thing we've done with these last couple of movies where we're not like pre-screening them. They're ones we haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah.
So we can't pretend this is what we told our listeners to watch The Legend of Billie Jean. And that's something we had to reckon with in a very different way from we told our listeners to watch Radio Flyer. And now we have to reckon with that. I kind of
we're like setting traps for ourselves.
Truly. Cause now it's like, explain yourself. And I'm going to. So I do kind of like that. Cause at first when I was watching it, I was like, oh no, like this is something we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth, especially if our listeners have connected with us over these last few months. I'm going to guess we have a lot in common.
There's something wrong with them too.
I'm going to guess we have a lot in common.
Us.
So hopefully the conversation we're going to have today is one that will resonate with them as well.
Hopefully. Yeah. So
before we get into it, it seems that news on the Yellowjackets home front has been quiet. So I think we can just kind of jump into it. I'm going to ask you, Jodie, what your initial feelings were. But first, I was kind of keeping tabs on, like, we've been talking about this general vocabulary we've been almost unintentionally building.
Yes.
And this movie has a ton of it.
It sure does.
First and foremost, Elijah Wood.
Yes. Yes. Tiny, tiny, tiny Elijah Wood with giant eyes.
I looked it up. He's like 5 years older than me.
Yeah.
I thought he was a little older and just, like made a deal with some sort of wizard who's kept him young, which might also be true, but he's not that much older than me. And I just realized, like, I know I'm always going to talk about how in love with Elijah Wood I am, but it's just like I would have only been 6 when this movie came out. And so, like, there's really not a time in my life I can remember where I wasn't in love with him. Which
is so funny because to me, he's always been about 5 years younger than me.
Right.
And so if I had seen this movie in 1992, I would have been 15 or something, or 16.
So you would have been old enough to
I would have babysat Elijah Wood.
And to see this movie more for what it really is than I did. Which is an interesting thought too. There's a station wagon in this movie.
There sure is. That's in my notes.
There's a good station wagon in this movie.
There's a good station wagon. Let's do a quick recap of the film. You can take that one because it's your film, and then we'll talk about it.
This movie, maybe more than any others, is very easy to recap. I will say it's a little too long, considering the fact that here's what this movie is about. Woman's husband leaves her. She has 2 young kids. They drive across the country. She marries a man who at first seems great. He is an abusive piece of shit. He's an alcoholic, and he has decided for some reason that the target of all of his anger is the younger of the two boys.
Mm-hmm.
And these two boys spend their time escaping into this like fantasy world. They eventually decide, as the violence escalates, they eventually decide they need to get Bobby, he's the younger one, away. And the way they do that is by building this radio flyer, this magical flying machine. And we'll get into what I'm about to say now. But if you are just watching the screen, he flies away.
Yeah.
He escapes at the end of the movie, and we ostensibly know this to be true because adult Mikey is telling this story to his young sons from the present day.
Right.
Where he says he has continued all of this time to receive postcards from his younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
That's the movie.
Yeah.
There's also a dog and a turtle.
There's a very significant dog.
Yes, the dog matters big time.
Yes. Shane.
And there's also a turtle named Samson.
Yes.
And that's mostly the movie.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. I mean, like, there's a significant buffalo.
There's a very significant buffalo.
That's like staring at me over your shoulder right now, which is real creepy.
He's something that I think is really...
Oh, and there's some bullies. There's a lot of bullying.
It's another movie where there are bullies whose job it is to be bullies.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to talk about this movie that has a lot to do with things we talked about in Yellowjackets, like in terms of, growing up and looking back in memory and all of that. I think that's probably what most of this conversation is going to be. I've done more research on this movie than I have any of the other ones we've talked about so far. But before we get into all of that, what did you think?
I have two completely separate brains about this movie. I have to preface this by saying that I watched this movie on Friday night, took a bunch of notes, did a little bit of research.
I don't know why I thought you were going to say something like took a bunch of acid. Like, I really thought you were going somewhere.
Because last night, then I saw the Barbie movie, which felt like an acid trip. And so in my brain, this weekend, I had Radio Flyer and the Barbie movie. And I am just...
It's a match made in heaven.
I'm a mess right now.
Match made in heaven.
I don't know what is happening. Although there is... I could do a dissertation on the theme of the patriarchy that runs through both of those movies. But you haven't seen Barbie yet, though, right?
No, not yet.
Okay. I won't go too far into it.
I have watched 3 times now Ryan Gosling singing Matchbox 20, though I cannot tell you how perfectly... Like, I can tell you, obviously, like, this movie is made for our... whatever.
Yeah.
But, like... If you had told me that's all the movie was, that people were paying $18 or whatever it costs to go see a movie now, to sit in a theater for 4 minutes and watch Ryan, I would have been like, give it an Oscar.
Yeah.
Give it an Oscar. That's all I need.
The cackles from the like 30, 35 plus women in the theater. It wasn't a sold out theater, but it was like a mix of young girls wearing pink, which weirdly touched me in a strange way.
No, I love that. Yeah.
And like women my age, I went with two, like a 40-ish crowd of 2 other women. That's not a crowd. Group of 2 other women and myself. And the cackles during them singing and the looks on the girls' faces, the Barbies' faces, while they watched the Kens sing at them. And it's referred to as singing at them. I fucking died.
It's so good. It's so good.
After you see this, I think you should see the movie and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it was like, I mean, we don't need to do a whole episode on a brand new movie that literally every podcast I listen to has talked about in the past week.
But
to the point where I like almost didn't want to see the movie because I was like, can we stop talking
You're
about
like,
this?
I get it. Yeah.
But I didn't. I'm glad I went. Anyway, all that to say that I have 2 minds about this movie. I have the mind of myself as an adult watching a movie that is pretty shaggy and possibly ill-conceived in its like choice of ending and its depictions of child abuse in this sort of gauzy... We can talk about the specifics of the way that it's depicted, like the fact that the king is never really shown and all of that. With the fact that I am aware that if I saw this when I was a child, I would have had a very different reaction. Because I think, as we so tellingly joked about at the beginning of this episode, if you're a child that grows up with some trauma, escapist fantasy like this is really important.
Mm-hmm.
right? And so like I'm going to talk about this movie by talking about a book, which seems to be a thing that we're starting to do. But there's a book that I loved as a kid called The Gone Away Lake.
Ooh.
Yeah, you should read it. You'd love it. How are we unintentionally doing a book club right now? Gone Away Lake. Gone Away Lake is by I think Elizabeth Enright.
Yes.
It has amazing illustrations if you get the original version of the book. I would highly recommend not reading it on a Kindle, but like actually buying like a used copy or something.
Mm-hmm.
I've bought this book for friends in the past. It is an escapist fantasy about a brother and a sister who like find this abandoned Victorian lake community. I know, Andrea.
That's my dream.
Yes.
What do you mean?
They find this elderly brother and sister at this Victorian lake community that has fallen into disrepair, and they have like a clubhouse and all this stuff. And like, it is the escapist fantasy of a kid, and there's no trauma in that book. It's not about kids escaping from trauma. It's just kids being kids,
right?
And like finding a place that's theirs.
Oh, that's so nice.
But as soon as I saw the clubhouse, weirdly, the clubhouse is the thing that got me in this movie.
This like safe, set aside. Like the fact that the king nobody ever gets inside that clubhouse.
No.
Like the bullies try, the king tries, nobody gets in.
Yeah. And so the idea of the clubhouse as this little escape, like oh
God, we could fire off so much of these. Bridge to Terabithia.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, it was like my whole reading as a childhood were these like escapist fantasies of kids getting away from whatever was happening in real life. But that club, you may end up cutting this. This is so pathetic. But when I was a kid, I lived in this shitty little town in New Jersey. Apologies if any of my classmates are listening and they don't think it was shitty, but it was shitty for me. And there was a literal tin shack attached to the side of our garage that was maybe 3 feet by 5 feet that we kept like gardening tools in.
I was gonna say, right? Yeah.
And that was my clubhouse. And I would go sit in my little tin shack by myself. And I like hard related to the clubhouse in the backyard piece of this. I obviously have lots of like adult critiques of this movie as a person who understands plot and story and construction of these types of things. But I do also have the side of me that as a kid would have got it, would have understood like why this movie was like meaningful. I would have completely blocked out the child abuse part and just been like, yeah, bad shit's happening. Fine, whatever, cool. But they're building this thing to get away. Like I wouldn't have even registered how horrific the child abuse part was as a kid. Now I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. They put that on film. Like,
right.
Yeah.
I do think it's important to note here, this movie is rated PG-13. It was not intended. It's not a children's movie.
Right.
So,
but the question, a lot of the reviews I read though were like, but then who is this for?
Yes, exactly. You know? I think it speaks to, and I don't know, maybe this is still the case. I don't think it is. I think it speaks to the fact that we just weren't, like, nobody was paying attention to what I was watching when I was a kid. I think adults kind of thought that, like, if it was on TV, it was probably fine. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
totally.
No. So, like,
I was reading Stephen King at like 8 years old. So, like,
exactly.
You know.
So I think that, like, I saw this movie as a kid. It's not a kid's movie. There's a version of this movie that could be a kid's movie.
You pull out the really horrific abuse stuff and you just hint at it. And you like, you know.
There are a couple of ways that this movie could have made sense. And so much of it hinges on the ending. But what I want to do is I want to talk, and we don't usually do this, but I did a lot of reading up on the making of this movie because I was so puzzled because the, like, one way to look at it is, you know, we went over that plot, the end happens, and on the screen, like I said, he gets away. It's really pivotal though that at the beginning, and I have the script in front of me, Mikey, voiced as an adult by Tom Hanks, which is important. He's talking to his sons.
Unbilled Tom Hanks.
Yeah, right? And he says to his little boys, remember I told you guys about Uncle Bobby and me when we were kids. I didn't tell you the whole story because I left out a bunch of stuff because I figured you guys were too young. Well, I guess now is as good a time as any. In fact, now it's just about perfect. All right, listen up, but I want you to remember something.
Mm.
History is all in the mind of the teller.
Mhm.
Truth is all in the telling. Understand?
Yeah. I mean, the whole movie, that sets up the whole thing as like unreliable narrator, like, you know, memory as fragments.
Yeah, absolutely. He's telling the kids, like, I have lied to you or I am going to lie to you. But the whole thing is also in this conversation with, but a promise is the most important thing you can make.
Mhm.
And so I don't know that what he has watching it now, I was like, it almost sounds like this is a thought experiment for me that I'm trying on. And when I give some more background on the making of this movie, you might understand why I feel this way. I almost think there's a version of that where he's delivering that line, and what he means is, I know I told you Uncle Bobby died,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to tell you a different version of this story now so you can understand what I mean when I say truth is in the telling.
Right.
Here's the version that I had told myself all along, like something like that. Because one thing I read, and I'll drop links to everything, I'm kind of putting together a few different conversations here. One is Elijah Wood on an episode of Dead Eyes, which is a fantastic podcast. If you haven't listened to Dead Eyes, it's Connor Ratliff's podcast about being... Oh, have you listened to Dead Eyes, Jodie? Oh my God.
But I like Connor.
You will...
I've heard him in other things.
You will love Dead Eyes. So Connor was cut from Band of Brothers because allegedly Tom Hanks said he had dead eyes. He doesn't know if that's totally true. That's what he was told.
I've heard that story elsewhere. Yeah.
The story itself is amazing, but then the podcast is this really beautiful exploration of I don't even want to get too much into it because it's like that's ostensibly what it's about, but it's so not about that.
Sure.
And every episode is a different conversation with somebody else who has either been cut from something, where maybe they didn't understand why, or like he also talks to a lot of different people who were involved with different Hanks projects. And in one episode, he talks with Elijah Wood and the actor whose name I don't know off the top of my head, who plays the young Tom Hanks in Big.
Oh, okay.
So people who play younger versions of Tom Hanks. And so he talks with Elijah Wood, and according to again, so I'm pulling from a few different sources here. I'll link to all of them in the show notes. According to Elijah Wood, and this would have been the first thing I heard about this because Dead Eyes is one of my comfort podcasts, so I've listened to that episode more than once.
Right.
And according to Elijah Wood, the idea of Bobby actually dying at the bottom of that hill was much more explicit when he signed on.
Wow. Interesting.
And and that like for a movie that's not for kids, that makes sense, right? Then there is something almost like there is something more interesting about this movie if you know that Bobby, or if you're supposed to at least infer that Bobby dies, even though Mikey is telling you that he's soared away.
Then it's like a suicide film, which is wild for 1992. I mean,
totally.
Actually, we've been talking about the prevalence of themes of like teen and youth suicide in movies from that time.
Yeah.
Like Heathers, taking it from the other completely different angle, but like Heathers was basically a movie about like, you know, a supposed rash of teen suicides, which was believable because it was such a theme at the time.
Right. And this idea that like this child abuse was so horrific and Bobby was so desperate to escape it that death was preferable, even if Bobby didn't know he was going to his
which is
death.
A wild thing to make a movie about. I mean, like, I in my own little bit of research, I did find out that like this script was like a hot commodity, which is strange.
There's so much about that too, because then it's like, then I read, okay, so that's the original. So the script was written by David Mickey Evans originally. He didn't write it to be that like death ending. I'll get to that because this is the last piece that I got, which made really kind of like put a lot into perspective for me on this movie. So Elijah Wood says, actually, we're supposed to believe that Bobby dies at the end. Then I read that originally in this movie, there was a scene intended where and I think maybe even shot, where they're at this Smithsonian Aerospace whatever museum.
Yeah, I read this too. Yep.
And the radio flyer is on display next to the Wright brothers' first airplane, or one of their airplanes.
And that Bobby like works there or something, or that Bobby's alive and is part of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read that too.
I like that they got rid of that. That is like, because the rest of this movie isn't a fantasy movie. There are a couple of elements like the buffalo that we talked about, but he shows up in a dream, like the Bigfoot, like there are a few things like that.
Yeah. But if they included that at the end, then Tom Hanks setting it up in the beginning and being like, everything is a lie, that, you know, truth is in the telling, but then all of this is true because we go to this place and we see the evidence of it. That doesn't make any sense.
It
like
makes
those two things
no
don't
sense.
Connect at all.
Right. So I'm glad that they cut that.
Right. But they left it with an ending that was just like, huh?
Well, and then I think that's because David Mickey Evans, this is where it really comes together for me, and this is where the conversation that I want to have with you about what this movie could have and sort of should have been, which I think in my head, this is sort of how I watched it as a child.
Okay.
Is David Mickey Evans wrote I think a novella first, that then he wrote his script from.
Okay.
And then he was also signed on to direct it.
Right.
But then was eventually pulled from it. And that's when things really started to change. It seems like he was still involved in some of the conversations. He kind of speaks fondly about it, which I am surprised to hear considering the rest of it. But I found this conversation that David Mickey Evans had with this guy, Stephen Greenfield. And I'm going to read quite a bit, actually, but you can feel free to jump in. There's just a lot here, so don't worry about interrupting because we'll just work through some of this. Stephen Greenfield asks, how did the story change from what you ultimately sold? Were there changes the studio compelled you to make that you perhaps only did because you at the time didn't want to rock the boat directorially? And
it's a leading question.
Yeah, right? Evans says, it was softened, which I never liked. And in comparison to a recent film like Precious, seems to have vindicated my point of view. Now, he says it was softened, which makes me think the script was a lot, like, even darker. But
right. Well, softened could mean that, like, in his mind, you know, Bobby died.
Right. Except no.
Oh.
Yeah. The most glaring change was the end of the film. The original script ended with a reunion of sorts between Mike and Bobby grown up in the Smithsonian National Aerospace Museum. So that ending was his original ending.
Got it.
Where the radio flyer is on display next to the Wright flyer, with the exception that it has no visible means of support, no wires, nothing. It's just hovering in midair proudly. So in Evans' movie, it's magic.
Right.
It's magic.
Yeah. They've decided on the supernatural.
Yeah.
It's the supernatural. It's not trauma.
Right, exactly. Mr. Donner's opinion, who ended up, Richard Donner ended up taking
the directing
over. Mr. Donner's opinion was that the ending should be a Rorschach test for the audience. I believe that it is entirely wrong. Having said that, he was very kind to me and included me at every stage of production, blah, blah, blah. So this movie on this screen, if I had sat down, actually, I'm gonna open this up to you as well. Mm-hmm. If this had been if you were in a test audience and you sat down and watched this movie as is, do you think you would have preferred the ambiguous ending?
So I like ambiguous endings generally. Mm-hmm. I don't think that this one works.
Right.
For me. I think that, like, I'm fine with ambiguity. It's one of the reasons I like Yellowjackets and don't want them to decide one way or the other.
Yeah, we've
is
talked
it
about
supernatural?
This a million
is it trauma?
times.
Like, I do lean towards. I think also though, just at my core, I'm like realist as a person, and I do prefer concrete. I'm contradicting myself. I'm aware of that, but like,
I don't think so.
But so I like ambiguity, but I also I think tend towards. I think the reason it doesn't work for me in this movie is because of the dissonance between the intensity of the abuse and the lightness of the ambiguous ending. It's like, did he die or did he fly a magical plane? It's a pretty wide gap.
Yeah.
In ideas for an ending. It's not like So again, my brain goes to Yellowjackets because of how we started this. But in Yellowjackets, it's like, is it trauma or is it there's fucking demons and shit in the woods? It's like this horror or this horror, right?
Yeah.
In this movie, it's like this horror or fucking magical flying machine.
Yeah, the ambiguous scenes in Yellowjackets, it's not like what we learn in the present is all of those scenes we saw of them at that lake where they had a really nice time and everybody hung out and nobody died and they just like everything was lovely. Like that wouldn't make sense.
No.
There needs to be some balance there.
Yeah, it's just too different of like the possibilities at the end of this movie are he dies or a miracle happens.
Right. And this
like,
is not...
That's a big difference. Especially
when this movie has no fantasy elements, really. Like, I said the thing about the buffalo and all, but that's in a dream. There is nothing that happens in this movie that requires you to suspend your disbelief at all until the very, very end. And so it sets up a universe where magic isn't real and then asks
even though
you
he's
to believe...
talking about it. Like he's talking about the 7, you know.
Well, this is what's fascinating to me, Jodie, is so he talks about the 7 lost. Also, the voiceover in this movie is so saccharine in some ways that so there's a part
it's very Tom Hanks.
It's so Tom Hanks. There's a line I wrote down.
No offense to Tom Hanks.
No, of course not. He knows what he is. He says when they're at the carnival, when he like, I don't know what, but he goes, I could tell by the look in Bobby's eyes that night that he knew about a special secret thing that all kids know. Only he knew more. A lot more. Jodie, what?
I don't know.
Jodie, what?
I don't know.
Also because, hold on. Also because, I want to put a pin in the 7 lost secret fascinations and abilities of childhood because that is... Everything in this movie hinges on that.
Yes.
But Tom Hanks, what? Also, Bobby doesn't come up with the idea for the flying machine. Mikey does.
No, he just says
so
like...
he's not the one who has the special secret thing that all kids know, blah, 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 blah. So that's whatever.
I also read a third wild take on this movie, which is that Bobby's not real.
We need to get into that as well. I think we need to... Hold on. Woo. There's so much going on. There are several ways to interpret that ending. We have only talked about 2.
2 of them,
there are like 2 ways with subways, I guess, below them. There's like 1A, 1B, 1B.
There's the A train,
2.
There's the C train.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's, the one on the screen is Bobby survives by flying away.
Mm-hmm.
Mikey lives... Also... The other thing is that the king does get arrested at the end, so Bobby didn't need to leave. I know that he got arrested earlier and comes back, but like you get the impression this time
it's because
it's really going to stick.
Yeah, because this movie is of the genre that all cops are good. And
well, it's John Hurd, so I'll allow it.
Yeah,
but but so that falls apart too. That if Bobby escaped. But also the king was arrested. Like, there's just no... there's that. There's Bobby dies at the bottom of the hill is another way. Mm-hmm. Another other way is Bobby is a creation of Mikey to deal with the abuse that he suffers.
Right.
And that Bobby escapes when finally the king is
arrested. Right. And that Mike doesn't need him anymore.
Right,
because
exactly.
The king is gone.
Especially because, and what I'm about to say now, this isn't to say that this doesn't happen, and we have heard stories like this before. So, but it is a little peculiar in this movie that the king never lays a hand on Mikey.
Mm-mm.
And in fact, Mikey asks the Great Buffalo, why does he beat up Bobby? Like, why is it always Bobby?
It's a wild sentence.
And the buffalo says because he can't fight back. But neither can Mikey.
Yeah, he's only like, what, 2-3 years older? He's still a kid.
Yeah. And so there's no like ostensible, again, other than the fact that like this does happen. Like often enough you hear stories about, you know.
There's one child that's like the chosen victim.
But it does make a kind of sense that to protect himself, Mikey was imagining Like,
right. It was happening to someone else. Yeah.
Or the flip of that, sort of, that he was imagined that he is the sort of Bobby in this, and that he's imagining having an older presence who's like trying to protect him. Either way,
right.
Like
right,
you
right,
can
right.
look at that, whatever.
Yeah.
So all of that, but then who is he talking to his kids about? Then he invented a brother that he told them was abused.
Yeah, I think it's a stretch. It fits in some ways, but in other ways, it very much doesn't fit that theory.
This is a too many cooks in the kitchen issue, I think.
Yeah,
and it's a trying to have it too many ways.
Yeah.
Here's what would have fixed this movie for me, and it's if you let David, whatever, Mickey Evans, is that his name? Yeah. Make this movie what he wanted it to be. So,
like a full-on fantasy.
Yeah, because here are the 7 of these lost secret fascinations and abilities. There's that scene where Tom Hanks is narrating them, and they are, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but they are that animals can talk. Mm-hmm. Your favorite blanket is woven from a fabric so mighty that once pulled over your head, it becomes an impenetrable force field. Nothing is too heavy to lift. Your hand, held forefinger out and thumbs up, actually fires bullets. Jumping from any height with an umbrella is completely safe. Monsters exist. They can both be seen and done battle with. Mm-hmm. And the greatest, most special, and regrettable loss of all, the ability to fly.
Okay.
He reads those lines.
Yes.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I just have something to say that I just realized when you were reading that. Every single one of those is disproven immediately after he says it.
Jodie! Every single one of those.
There's a scene disproving each one.
However, Jodie.
Okay, wait.
What do you think David Mickey Evans wanted to happen in that scene?
That they were all true.
In the original script, they're real. Monsters do exist. Animals do talk. In fact, all the material with Mike and Shane the dog communicating was removed. The dog talks in David Mickey Evans' beautiful fantasy movie. A blanket is an impenetrable force field. In the original script, when Bobby hops off the roof with the umbrella, he floats gently to the ground. That was the point of the entire section, to depict that within their world, all that stuff is vitally real. Actual. It is. It's their reality. Childhood magic, to be sure, but real.
Whoa. That's a different movie.
All you needed was that scene.
Yeah.
And then Bobby can fly away at the end, and we can be talking about how cool it is that this movie is ambiguous and lets you believe in a world where maybe a child can escape a reality like that. Or if you want to be somebody who, like you were saying, and I meant to say this a few minutes ago, when you were saying like you were kind of contradicting yourself.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't think so, because I want a reality where I can believe both things at the same time, where I can say like, yes, it's unlikely. Also, isn't it nice that we can for a moment? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This movie doesn't support that.
Right. No, it doesn't.
So, but then why that ending?
I don't know.
It makes no sense that they cut everything that allows for that ending, but kept the ending. I am losing my mind right now. I'm screaming. I'm so sorry.
You're so invested in this movie. I'm so glad that though. So my concern was we were gonna talk about this and you were gonna defend it to the death.
God,
that like everything was great and that it was like
Jodie.
I know you're an adult person with critical faculties, but like I do understand the impact of seeing something like this as a young kid, right?
Mm-hmm. Again, both of these things could be true. This was hugely important to me as a child.
Yes.
I understand their issues now. I love that there's a version of this that does work somewhere. It's a shame that they ruined it.
Well, and so here's the thing. When that speech happens and he's talking about the 7 lost secrets, right? And he says, animals can talk. The blanket is the force field. I specifically remember the blanket is the force field. He hits him over the head with something.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I'm fine. Because he has the blanket over his head. And then when Mikey walks away, Bobby's like, ow, that really hurt. Yeah. And I'm like, why did you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did you
none of that makes sense.
Disprove it immediately.
Especially when Tom Hanks is like, the truth is all in the telling, blah, 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 blah. And then there's not an element of that at all throughout the movie until we are asked to believe that Mikey and Bobby created a magical flying machine that works.
A propeller on it and some wheels.
He says in one of the postcards, the radio flyer works great.
Yeah, sure it does. Sure it does. Should we talk a little bit about Fisher?
I was just going to ask you if we should talk a little bit about Fisher. I think we should.
Talk about Fisher. I texted you during the movie, I think at some point. I was like, oh, the gas attendant guy is Fisher. Because before they
showed you the name tag and also made somebody say, hey, Fish. Yeah. And also showed you the headline of the newspaper article.
Before that. I got it before that.
They were really worried you weren't going to get it.
Yeah, no, I got it. I got it. Also, like, you know, the age thing worked out, but like
I laughed about that because you sent me that, and I was like, in my head, I was like, oh, it's a mystery. You're supposed to infer that, and so I almost sent you back maybe with like a like zipped emoji,
right,
not realizing, which also you had not realized at that point, that they're
gonna tell you 4 or 5 different times. Yeah. No, so the Fisher part of it, I think I kind of understand why it's there, but I think it also messes with our is this fantasy, is this reality thing, because it's like it's something that's very grounded in reality, right? This kid tried to fly on his bike. He crashed. He hurt himself. Now he works at a gas station and he limps everywhere.
Right. Bobby and Mikey, though, until they meet him, are of two minds. One of them thinks that was a suicide
There's no way
jump.
he made it. Yeah.
One of them thinks he made it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And again, you know, unreliable narrator, blah, blah, blah. Like, this could be, again, a part of Tom Hanks's, like, recollection of it, that he lived and that he was injured and all of that. But, like, it feels discordant to me in some weird way. This little, like, pulling out of the unreality of the two boys and, like, inserting a different reality from the town from 10 years ago. It just felt really weird to me. Like, I understand the setup of it as, like, how the idea gets introduced and all of that, but I just felt, especially when it's, like, inserted at the end when he's, like, filling up the tank, I was like, oh, okay.
Again, I think the way to do it, and it would have been, well, I guess there are a couple of ways to do it. If the movie you're telling is this boy was abused, he died at the end, but we're letting poor Mikey invent a reality where he escapes to deal with that.
Right.
Then the version of this is the story about Fisher that the kids told, because kids don't know anything, so they don't know, like, is that he tried to fly away and he escaped and he made it, and they've been using that this whole time as, like, motivation for why their flying machine will work. And then right at the end they meet Fisher, and it turns out he didn't escape.
No, he works at a gas station.
Yeah, and he's got the physical injury that is lasting to prove it.
Yeah.
Then you're like, oh shit, this flying machine's not going to work.
Right.
And then when Bobby escapes, you can be like, oh, how sad for poor Mikey that he's constructed this reality. We knew it wasn't going to work. This movie is not a movie where fantasy and magic are real.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't know what it is.
It really doesn't.
Or it's like the guy that wrote it knew it one way and the guy that directed it knew it another way. I will say I don't know a whole lot about the director of this movie. I did take a couple of notes on it.
Richard Donner?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so he's not... He directed the Lethal Weapon movies, which is a wild...
yeah, I love when something like this, where it's like, how did... But I think he also directed, like, most of what he directed are, like...
He worked on The Goonies.
He worked on The Goonies. He also worked on Scrooged. Like...
Right. Well, and okay, let's talk about this in relationship to The Goonies for a second. I feel like The Goonies is a take in this same world. It's a story in this same idea of young kids solving problems, sort of weird mystery things happening, scary adults, etc. But that movie fucking works.
Right.
I mean, The Goonies is one of my, like, all-time loved movies, and I've never once questioned, does it work? Does the ending work? And it has a very fantastical ending, you know?
It's, well...
Not in like, the magical, like, miracle sort of way, but, like...
Right. It is more grounded in its own reality. In a way that this movie is not. Yeah.
That's the thing. It's not grounded in anyone else's reality.
Right.
Really. Like, the story is wild, but because it knows what it is the entire fucking time and it doesn't stray from the rules of its own world,
right?
We buy it the entire time. So I think that's...
It also
this movie doesn't understand its own internal logic.
Yeah, exactly. It's also funny that you say that, because I'm thinking about it, and, like, that movie does feel, in a weird way, more, like, magical, even though I don't think there's nothing, like, actually...
It's fully magical, though.
Right? But, like, but it isn't. Like, there's something in that movie that happens that couldn't happen in our real world, right? I'm trying to remember. I haven't seen it in a little while, but I don't think so. But it feels more like an adventure fantasy kind of thing
Yeah.
than this movie does, even though this movie
Goonies only have a
explicitly
7.7 rating on IMDb?
Oh no.
That's blasphemy.
That can't be right.
I also just want to quickly jump to a few other notes that don't have to do with the ending.
Sure.
Because I feel like we could go like back and forth about this ending and never come to a conclusion because there isn't one. I wanted to talk about the representation of the king real quick. Like
Adam Baldwin.
Yeah.
No relation.
No relation. I think so. The way that they show him is a very significant choice, right? We almost never see his face.
Mm-hmm.
He's always seen as this looming presence above them, right? He's always shown in shadow almost. The only time I think I remember actually really seeing his face was when he was crying to the wife, the Lorraine Bracco character.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, he's this like almost like demonic.
Yeah.
You know.
He's because, again, this is a movie about monsters. Oh,
yes,
well, the script is about monsters. Yeah. And so they're sort of depicting him that way.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. So he's always playing Hank Williams. Mm-hmm. That's specifically the Jambalaya on the Bayou song. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think there's a reason for that. And I looked briefly and I remembered that Hank Williams died at 29 after years of back pain, alcoholism, and prescription drug abuse.
He was younger than I realized.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
He's somebody I think of. It's him and Otis Redding. I think of Otis Redding is another one. He was part of the 27 Club, which Otis Redding, I always think of him. It's because it's sitting on the dock of the bay. This is such a side note, but I always think of him as like an old man.
Right, sitting on a dock.
Yeah. He was a kid when he died. So sad. Anyway.
But so I do think that, he lived from 1923 to 1953. He was 29 when he died.
Wow.
And, he was dismissed by the Grand Ole Opry because of his unreliability and alcoholism. So I do kind of,
sad.
I know. So I do kind of think that choice of song was significant, and like the way that the king is represented as this sort of like stand-in for all like mean alcoholics.
Yeah. That's a weird, especially because like this movie doesn't take place in the South. It starts in Jersey and it ends up they're in California, right?
So I looked, it's Northern California, because I was concerned as to why they were wearing so many sweaters if they were in Southern California.
And that's why.
Yeah, they were in Northern California.
Okay.
Just north of San Francisco. It's a real town.
And so using Hank Williams as a sort of like a way to characterize the king.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Because he was born in Alabama and died in West Virginia. Like, it's not a California thing. But yeah, I don't know. I found the way they represented him to be interesting. And I say that knowing what a weird and vague term that is, as we have discussed. But like, I wrote in my notes at one point, this movie does not pass the Bechdel test.
Is Lorraine Bracco the only woman in this movie? Other than the aunt?
Yes, I believe so. And she has very little. So I think it's interesting to think about her as a character, because
I will say one tiny thing, not to excuse this in the movie. I am pro women in movies. It is a very small cast in general, and it is very much about these two young boys. So like, whatever. Anyway.
But I think for me, the reason I noticed it so much was because we've been watching a lot of female-centric media. Mm-hmm. This was the first one in maybe ever that we've watched that has like male leads. Mm-hmm. But also Lorraine Bracco's character in this is underwritten, I would say. It gives her something to do occasionally, right? She's a great actress. We love her from The Sopranos. I know you've never seen it, but it's part of your heritage.
I looked it up. She's not originally from Jersey.
Which is very sad.
She's from like Basking Ridge or something like that, but that's okay.
It's all right. We'll forgive her.
Yeah, exactly.
She does the accent quite well. But she's like, she is both a loving, sweet mother who works hard to, and she's also fully oblivious to horrific child abuse.
it's lazy because
Yes, it is lazy.
lets
That's
her
the
stay
thing.
innocent
Yes.
this whole time.
Yes, exactly.
And again, I don't know that I need to like disclaim this. I'm sure that there are cases of child abuse where there is a parent who does not realize it's happening.
Sure.
But I think the more common and more difficult and more honest like version of this is a woman who knows that in some or feels that in some way she needs King
to take care of her. Well, and we
Yeah.
get a little bit of that when she lets him back in the house after he puts her son in the fucking hospital. Which
Right.
I was like, whoa. But she's broke. They show that. She's got bills. She's like not, doesn't know how she's going to make it. She's falling apart.
And I think it's set in what is like the early 70s, I think.
Late
so
60s,
it's even
early
there's
70s probably.
So there's like even like she has like the options for a single, fairly young, I would say, like early 30s, right? Mom with two kids are limited.
One of my favorite and least favorite statistics is that before 1975, a woman could not open a credit card on her own without her husband's signature.
So insane.
Which is the year I was born.
Right. Insane.
So, yes, I think she had limited options, right? And
but
I think
they don't present it. It seems like the first time she even knows of the abuse is
when he's in the hospital.
Right.
Which is like, I find that to be a stretch. In a movie where a wagon flies, I still find this to be a stretch. Like
I agree. And they do include that one scene where after Bobby makes Mikey promise that he will help make sure that she never finds out. And I think that's why we're supposed to be like, oh, she didn't know. There's that scene in the bathroom where she's going to help him with his shirt. And you're like, oh, she's gonna
and Mike
see.
falls in the tub. Right?
Yeah. But I still,
it makes a false assumption about mothers, I think. Neither of us are mothers, we can stipulate. But I cannot imagine that if the abuse is that horrific, and correct me if I'm wrong, or whoever, but like, I just think that most mothers, she's presented as a good mother. Right. So most quote unquote good mothers that are not fully absent from their children's lives would know something was wrong.
Right. And it's not to say, and I know this isn't what you're saying either, I may be being a little overly careful about this conversation than we really need to be.
That's fair, though.
You're not saying like you're a bad, it's not that like
I'm not saying
only bad mothers let their children get abused.
Absolutely. Like, no. What I'm saying is this movie doesn't understand how a woman would act, think, feel, or be in the world.
Right. And I think that like probably they thought that if the viewer thought she knew that to some degree that something was happening and didn't immediately that
then she lets him back in the house after he puts her son in the hospital. And so, it kind of negates all of that buildup of her being this wonderful mom. I do, on a completely unrelated note, want to point out I was very happy that she worked in a diner.
Yep. A nice Jersey girl travel across the country. The first thing she does,
find a diner.
That's right.
Yeah, she's gonna call everyone hun.
Also, her name is Mary. I was like, some of this is a Springsteen song.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like Mary gets left high and dry, and then meets a guy who isn't named actually King. Good. Exactly.
It is a Springsteen song. You're right. Yeah. Finds a diner job. Yeah. No, there's stuff. I mean, we talk about like how quick can we find the Jersey connection. The first scene of this movie, like
we didn't even do that on purpose.
I know. No, they come from Jersey. She has the accent in this movie.
They get roasted for it by Buffalo Bill.
Okay. To our few like crossover New Jersey is the world / watchers, listeners, when Geronimo Bill, which is
Geronimo Bill, not Buffalo Bill. Oh, Buffalo Bill is Silence of the Lambs.
And Geronimo, okay, there's a whole sort of critique of the treatment of indigenous themes in this movie that we could talk about.
Oh, yeah?
But when they go to Geronimo Bill's sad roadside attraction with one buffalo,
one weeping buffalo,
the Mikey says to him, she says, "Oh, we're from out of town or whatever," and Mikey says, "We're from Jersey." And Geronimo Bill says, "That don't make y'all bad." Did Mike D and Nick steal this? That don't make him a bad guy. Come on, it's too close.
Don't make him a bad guy.
It's too close. Anyway, yeah.
I love it so much. Also, this is another scene that feels so out of place in this movie, but wouldn't have felt out of place in David Mickey Evans' script, because this buffalo is weeping, which isn't like, I'm sure buffalo gets sad. I don't know that they cry like humans do for being alone.
There is so much magical quote unquote Indian imagery in this movie.
The way this buffalo shows up to, like, later on with the voice of Geronimo Bill to deliver a message is like, it's like a weird vision, like, stuff.
Yes.
But something that I think is interesting about the buffalo is, I want to talk a little bit about the giant buffalo. He's made by an effects oh my god, he's made by like a creature creator, Nick Lazzarini, and his company, the Character Shop.
Oh, cool.
So they made this giant buffalo, and Lazzarini, again, I'll drop links to all of this. This is from Character Shop's website. He worked on stuff like Hook, Exorcist 3, Batman, blah, blah, blah. And originally he had been picked for this movie to make this buffalo, but also zombies and a 5-armed worm man, and a bunch of other stuff that, again, points to how much more fantastical this
like
movie was
actual
supposed
monsters.
to be. Yeah, like it would have been an interesting thing. Something I often think about is, and I'm contradicting myself after everything else I've said here, is that, like, there's also, we do see the giant turtle and the Bigfoot creature. Those are in this movie. Though both, again, in full imagination, not grounded
clearly
in the reality.
Not real.
Because
again, it's negated instantly, right?
Yes.
So you see Bigfoot and then you immediately see it's actually the dog,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no moment where you're like, could that be real? Could things be not as they seem? No, it's the dog.
And when the buffalo shows up, it's in a dream, all of that. I like a version of this movie that is faithful to that script, where sometimes when we see the king, it's he's also represented as an actual monster, because according to David Mickey Evans, monsters are real and can be done battle with. Right. So I just wanted to point that out too, that, like, they made it as far as hiring somebody to make these creatures in this movie.
And not to jump back and forth, but I do want to just point out that the actual Geronimo, who was an Apache leader and a medicine man, spent the last 23 years of his life as a prisoner of war to the U.S. government. Like, I understand this is like 1992 and maybe, lots of problematic shit was done and said in my childhood, but watching it now, it definitely, as somebody who, we don't need to talk about my professional life, but as somebody who, like, looks at images of Indigenous people and talks about the ways they were represented as this, like, vanishing race, it just stood out to me as, like, really, like, icky and
and just the idea of the buffalo being a sort of stand-in for the, like, there's a lot that we were,
and the crying buffalo, like, there's a lot of sort of borrowed, that's what it is, there's a lot of borrowed, and I'm using this term in quotes, like, Indian magic kind of stuff that is obviously just stolen from and whitewashed and used for whatever purposes. Underneath, I've got notes about the buffalo. I've got, like, just one sad caged buffalo. Buffalo is crying. The next line in my notes is, I am so glad I don't have kids.
I think that's when they were singing in the car.
It's when they were singing in the car. I worked with kids for, like, little kids for all of my, like, middle and high school years. And I, like, worked primarily with 4 and 5-year-olds and worked at day camps and taught swim lessons. And
That was enough.
That was enough. That was enough. Also, I had a pet turtle for like 6 months.
I also had a pet turtle for not very long. We acquired him from a campground. I don't know. I don't remember, actually.
Okay.
This is illegal, but the cabin that I'm often hanging out in when we record together, from that campground when I was a kid, we brought a box turtle home.
Yeah, I don't remember where I got the turtle that I had for a brief period of time. I do know that I let him go in like Vanson Park, which was probably a terrible idea. He probably died.
Know. Oh, God, we didn't know. What was his name?
Simon.
Aw, cute.
Yeah.
Samson.
Right, exactly. Okay. I think one of the things I want to talk about that isn't really about the critical feelings that we have about this movie is this idea of like quote unquote childhood magic. Like the things that you believe in as a kid or want to believe in as a kid that this movie plays around with, and that I think we're both kind of wishing it had either chosen to do or not do. Do you remember light as a feather, stiff as a board?
Of course.
I just started thinking of all the things when I was a kid that we thought were like, because the Ouija board appears in this, right?
Oh, yeah.
That we thought were
and their wish spot is a big deal.
Yeah. That reminded me of Gone Away Lake also. There's a Philosopher's Stone theme in Gone Away Lake that is really awesome.
There's a line about the wish spot that is, I'm so sorry, but I'm just going to read it because it's another example of this movie just... the things they made Tom Hanks say. We finally got up enough nerve to climb that big hill. We called the top the wishing spot because we reasoned that God would have to hear a wish made that close to heaven. We made a lot of wishes up there, but mostly just one. For the king to for the king to stop hitting Bobby.
Oh God.
Like
it's so heavy-handed.
Christ.
It's so heavy-handed. It's also E.T., right? Like, it's not E.T., but that ending scene when they fly off on the wagon, this is after E.T. It's just E.T., but not E.T.
Yeah. In fact, if you found out there's a version of the script where E.T. is actually an abused child that they have like, you know what I mean? Like, isn't actually an alien. He's he's just an out of town kid that they like misremembered or like or however you want to remembered as like.
Oh God!
You'd be like, oh yeah, I could totally see it.
The unreliable narrator of E.T. The other thing that I think you mentioned this, the pressure cooker, the thing they make on the stove.
I am not one to victim blame two small children. But y'all got to keep an eye on the stove when you know the king is going to be home any minute.
Yeah.
Although they do sort of get away with it. Except don't hide his weapon of choice in the oven. What are you?
I know.
Guys.
Children can be very dumb. Yeah. But who hasn't made a weird kitchen concoction? I remember.
Oh my God. Yeah.
We had like a cookbook, like a crowdsourced cookbook from the students in our class in like 6th grade.
Oh, yeah.
You know, one of those things that you like bind with a ring binder or whatever. And one of the recipes was butterscotch. And I tried to make it in 6th grade by myself. And I burned it, of course. And then I put it in the fridge to cool down, but I put the metal tray on the glass shelf in the fridge.
Oh, no.
And it like exploded everywhere. Like, I did relate a little bit to like being a stupid child and like making a mess of the kitchen.
I think all of that is like feels very real for children, especially when they're like coming up with their substitutes for everything in the recipe because it's a magic recipe.
Yeah.
So I get all of that, but one of them's like, oh, I'm gonna watch some TV. And they totally forget. It's like, guys,
maybe he has ADHD.
Oh,
Andrea.
No.
I'm sorry. As a full adult, I have like left water boiling on the stove and gone to watch TV like in the past year.
Yeah, maybe I'm projecting my own like.
Yeah.
It's like a hurt people thing.
Yeah. Because I have literally like scorched a pot on my stove within the past year.
Yeah.
Because I put water on to boil an egg and then walked away for like a half an hour.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, you know. Undiagnosed ADHD was a thing in the early 90s.
You know what? You're so right. You're so right. Forgive me, Elijah Wood and other actor Mazzello, I think is your last name.
Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about because there's some really intense critical reception to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's some funny critiques. Like, the people that hated this movie had a really good time writing about how much they hated this movie.
Do you have a particular one you want to share?
I have
I'd love
a couple.
to hear.
Yes. So this is from a New York Times review from 1992. And I mean, it's harsh. Richard Donner's Radio Flyer is one of those infrequent and embarrassing efforts of a perfectly adequate Hollywood director to make the kind of offbeat movie for which he has no aptitude at all.
Yikes.
That's the only way to explain why this tale of childhood magic winds up being so bleak and gross.
Gross.
He says, Radio Flyer is a memory film, a story told on a sunny afternoon to two small boys to illustrate why it's important that promises be kept. But by the end, though, the story can just as easily be read as a metaphor about a child's suicide, which doesn't seem to have been anyone's intention. Not unfair. But then he says, dealing with this delicate material, he is like someone trying to thread a needle while wearing boxing gloves.
Ooh, yikes.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of something. At the very end of this movie, one of the boys asks Tom Hanks, "Is that where we got Samson from?" And he says, "Yes." And they say, "Do you promise?" And he says, "Yes."
Mm-hmm.
But Samson was on the Radio Flyer with Bobby.
Huh.
So what is being betrayed? What is being betrayed there?
Is he lying to the kids, or is the whole okay?
Like, what?
I wonder if that's a continuity error, or if that's a
because the kids say, "Is that where you got Samson from? Is that where we got Samson from?" And you got Samson because you found him and kept him.
Right.
So that's true, I think.
Sure.
I don't know how else.
But Samson was on,
which means
the Radio
Samson wasn't on Radio Flyer because
either it never happened, or
right.
Yeah, okay.
Or he didn't make it on the plane, but why would you say that it did only for it to...
Right. Interesting. Probably a continuity error, but also a very big one if it is.
And who knows with this movie? Like, why would you include... That line doesn't... Like, who cares?
Right.
Except you made me care by including it. And so I think the way... Like, I'm working through this because I kind of just saw that and then went, we'll talk about that. And it feels to me like Tom Hanks in that scene, the way he plays that scene, the kids say, "Do you promise?" And in my head, I'm like, he knows he's lying and promises anyway.
Right. And
so is the lie in that promise part of the truth is all in the telling and it's okay? Like, are we supposed to think like, oh, well, the promise is still real because it matters? You know what I mean? Like, or are we like...
I think it's another bit of evidence that this movie is too many cooks, too many hands, not on the same page about what this movie is actually about.
Yeah, because you didn't need to include that line at all.
Yeah. So another great negative review that speaks to this about the director. It says, Donner has a reputation for manhandling scripts, and you get the feeling that beneath his stalker movie techniques is a real movie with a genuine feel for its characters and its subject. Having stomped on the accelerator in the Lethal Weapon movies, he may have his gears locked permanently in overdrive. At any rate, his touch is lethal.
Yikes.
Harsh.
But yeah. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah. Totally. I agree.
I'm trying to think about it generously, and I think I can imagine a conversation where they start making this movie that's going to be this really like escapist, fantastical movie where the dog is like Mikey and Shane are talking to each other, and you see these scenes of them flying around with umbrellas, and they're like, but also it's a movie about child abuse and pretty horrific child abuse, and maybe we need to be a little more grounded. Maybe it does a disservice to actual cases of abuse or to even the case in this movie.
I mean, I would argue it still does, though.
I 100% agree.
Like, that's, I think, the issue that a lot of people had with this movie was like the setup is so horrific and the ending is so not dealing with that at all.
Exactly.
Like,
it is a weird, that's what I mean, is that like maybe that's how it started. Maybe that's how they started taking the shine off of it, but they didn't fix it. They made it worse. Right. And obviously I don't know if that is actually how it happened or not. I have no idea. I'm just, again, trying to imagine how this ends up happening. And
it's so funny. This is what I mean when I say I have two minds about this movie, because part of me is like thinking about and seeing all of these weird errors and misfires and critical things, and yet I still understand the need for, and again, it's not a children's movie, but the need for children to have these escapes. Like, when I was a kid, I was really into Harriet the Spy. And
Jodie.
My mom recently told me a story of the time when she couldn't find her typewriter and she found me with it in a tree. And I've recently realized that I think I was spying on my neighbors and writing about them. So, like, I do get the sort of childhood magic of this whole thing as well while I'm being this critical.
I kept thinking about, while I was watching this and thinking about it, that ending, again, I love an ending like that. We love Yellowjackets, like you said at the top of this episode.
Because of the ambiguity. Yeah.
My absolute favorite book has never not been The Little Prince.
Oh.
And the end of that that book is about a man remembering getting stuck. If you've never read The Little Prince, it's a children's book. You read it in 45 minutes.
Yeah, I read it. I don't have like a literal memory of it, but I did read it.
Well, I'm going to spoil it for you and our listeners.
Okay, great.
So I would say skip ahead a couple, unless Jodie, you want me to not spoil it for you.
No, please spoil it.
I said it's a children's book you can read in 45 minutes. It's a children's chapter book. It's not like so it would take you a little bit to read it. But it is absolutely beautiful. And it's about a pilot who crash lands in the desert. And while he is trying to make repairs on his plane, a little boy approaches him and starts recounting how he got there. And this little boy says, "I came from an asteroid. It was me and this Rose were the only two things on this asteroid, and I flew away by lassoing a small flock of birds because I need to find something to protect her." And he tells all these fantastic stories about different planets he landed on, and it's very magical. And also, there is a snake who tells the little prince, when you want to return to your planet, I will bite you, and you will be sent back. And the pilot believes that the little prince will, if he gets bitten by a snake, will die. Mm-hmm. And the little prince believes that he gets bitten by a snake, he will get to go back to his home planet.
Right.
In the end of the book, the little prince gets bitten by the snake. The pilot sees him fall, but then can't find his body.
Right.
And so you get to live in a world where, is this man remembering, is this a hallucination? Right. Is this man remembering a little boy who gets bitten by a snake and dies in the desert? Is there a possibility that he was bitten and returns to his home planet? And all of those things exist all at once.
Right.
And the book is framed, again, like I said, he's speaking from adulthood, and the whole first chapter of it is talking about how the imagination of a child is like so much more expansive and like generous than that of an adult. Mm-hmm. And so it sets you up in the same way that Radio Flyer does to be living in both of those worlds. Right. It's a very similar thing. The construct or whatever of the narrative is very similar and allows for the ambiguity to exist in a way that you and I both find very satisfying.
Yeah, and I think the point you're making is a good one, which is that this has been done before successfully in other media and other sort of movies and books and things, this balancing of the fantasy, imagination, childhood part and the reality, and leaving you to like be in that gap, but in a way that doesn't feel disingenuous or uncomfortable, you know? And here, I think, I was wondering when I was watching this, if this would work better if the contrast wasn't so stark. So like in Goonies, to come back to Goonies, the setup is that they're going to lose their house. because a country club is coming in.
Right.
Right. If the setup here was less horrible, if it was not like horrific child abuse that they're trying to escape, I just think for me the contrast is so stark that it's hard to reconcile.
And I know this is me being me and the percentage of people who are going to agree with me. The thing that pushes this movie over the edge with that is that he almost kills a dog.
Yes.
You don't include that in a, like,
I was so upset.
Yeah.
I was so upset.
And he almost kills the dog as punishment for the boys because he does it. He thinks Shane is dead and says, like, don't ever touch my tools again.
Right.
Which is like, animal cruelty. Not that it's okay to hit kids.
Right.
I don't mean that, but I mean, like,
this.
It's so intentional when you include somebody being... Do you know what I mean?
I do, because in Yellowjackets, Tawny Cypress's character nearly kills her wife, and you are still more upset about the dog.
Well, because that dog is innocent. That dog did not choose. That dog didn't marry Ty.
Yeah, I would like to point out that before I found out that the dog didn't die, I texted you and said, oh God, please tell me he doesn't kill the dog. Andrea, God damn it. Jesus, I would have killed you if there was a dead dog and you didn't warn me. Because there's a period of time where you think he did kill the dog.
Yeah.
And you didn't text me back.
Well, because in my head, I was like, wow, I blocked that out entirely.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that I would have blocked it out entirely if the dog did die.
Yes.
Yeah. So I didn't want to, but yeah.
Yes. And you said I would never have made us watch it if the dog died, which I appreciate because I literally went to, for those of you that aren't aware, there's a website called Did the Dog Die?
I had to double check. That's what I did before I texted you.
Yeah. I also went there. Where you can look up movies.
It's another thing too. This is so little, but he beats that dog so severely that we think the dog is dead. And then they get that dog. Fine. He's fine. And somebody wraps him in a bedsheet. I'm guessing the boys like wrap him in. He's like, when they're on the hill, he's like in a sling kind of.
Yeah.
It's very like, you can't.
Yeah, he looks almost dead and then he's kind of fine.
He's mostly fine.
I would like to point out that Did the Dog Die is a gift to those of us that have some triggers for movies.
Yes.
Because if you're not aware of it, there's 160 categories. It's not just about dog
death.
Not
just, it's the one I use most frequently.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. But like you can search for movies where there is cannibalism. Mm-hmm. Where there is
which is great because that means if you're looking for movies about cannibalism.
Right. And you can pin categories that are important to you. So a dog dies. So also for phobias, like there are sharks, there are spiders, animals were harmed in the making, there are bugs, a pet dies, lots of like warnings for animal abuse. Mm-hmm. But there's also like human warnings. And I will say that my dad died 12 years ago and I got not tricked. I don't think this was intentional, but I ended up watching a movie where like within 2 months of my dad dying, where a father dies.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was like, I need to know these things in advance.
Yeah. You got to tell me.
That. Yeah. There's a website for that. So
I'll link to it, but it's literally just doesthedogdie.com, right?
Yeah.
But I'll link to it. It is a wonderful resource for tender-hearted people.
Yes. I'd also like to say that
I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I'm counting myself among the tender-hearted people.
I think that's a compliment. Roger Ebert also hated this movie.
What did he have to say?
He said, it seems to be asking how, he says, one of the things I resisted was the movie's almost dog-like desire to please. It seems to be asking, and this speaks to your Tom Hanks and his saccharineness, how can anyone dislike a movie that is against child abuse and believes little red wagons can fly? I found it fairly easy. The movie pushes so many fundamental questions under the rug of its convenient screenplay that the happy ending seems like cheating, if not like a fraud.
Totally.
Yeah.
Really, and it is wild to think that like it was even that their way of dealing with that was to make, what am I trying to say? Was to scale back on the believability of the ending rather than increase the believability, because that scene at the Aerospace Museum makes no sense in this movie.
Yeah.
If like imagine if that happened and then the last scene was them meeting up with Bobby and there is a hovering radio flyer in the Smithsonian. What conversations about flight are happening in the greater universe of this movie if the radio flyer works.
Yeah.
Like,
also they're at an airport in the beginning of this movie, and so like if magical hovering flying machines exist, like you would think that would have an impact on standard air transportation.
Totally like there should be, exactly. So like instead of fixing that, they just made instead of building a universe where the ending they want you to believe in makes sense, they just do you know? I don't even know. I know I'm like struggling here, but it's because
no. I know what you're trying to say. Instead of making a film where the universe supports the ending, they just kind of left the ending hanging and didn't tell you what they thought the ending was going to be be.
And I don't think, because we're like, oh, it's supposed to be ambiguous, but it's sort of not.
Right, because Tom Hanks, in Tom Hanks's mind, it's not ambiguous. He's getting postcards from Bobby.
Exactly.
Yeah. Roger Ebert also writes, who is this movie made for? Kids? Adults? What kid needs a movie about a frightened little boy who is at the mercy of drunken beatings? What adult can suspend so much disbelief that the movie's ending, a visual ripoff from E.T., inspires anything other than credulity? It was one of the hottest screenplays in town. Yeah. If somebody at a story conference, this is the killer line. If somebody at a story conference didn't describe this movie as child abuse meets Peter Pan, they were missing a bet. Wow, Roger Ebert.
What a
and your Pulitzer Prize for distinguished criticism.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
So funny.
He says at the end there's an 800 number you can call if you want information on child abuse, which I noted.
I did see that too.
I imagine the volunteers at the other end would have some pithy observations about this movie. Wow.
That is so funny. What year did, hold on, this is important too. Runaway Train, the Soul Asylum, it might also be the album, but the song in particular came out June of 1993. We were really kind of obsessed with like child endangerment. That's about missing children, not abused children.
We were. I mean, the milk carton kids and like.
Well, and we've talked about this so much on New Jersey is the World, so I'm not, like, you and I aren't having a new conversation here, but it is something I noted in this movie is that, like, children were missing and we were afraid of them being stolen, but we also were not paying attention to them at all.
No.
Like, Bobby and, like, Mike even says, like...
They're crawling through pipes. And I was like, yeah, that's real.
You guys learned that in Jersey.
Yeah.
Like, I spent a lot of times crawling through pipes as a kid. Like, and it's, like, it's so funny because, Mikey says we figured out the way to protect Bobby as best we could was like we would leave first thing in the morning and we wouldn't get home until right before dark, which is like I was kind of told. I was like, go, like, see you at dinner time. And so
that was normal.
Both of those things, like, no wonder we were concerned that children were going to get stolen because we never knew where the fuck they were.
Right.
So, like, it's just interesting that
but
all of this was happening at the same time.
We've talked about how that time felt super dangerous for kids and also lawless and also, like, you would be gone for all the daylight hours.
Yeah, they were, like, stealing lawnmower motors from, like, abandoned...
And they said the guy was dead. How did they know the guy was dead?
Who
like,
knows?
They refer to it repeatedly as they went on expeditions. And I actually really loved that because I feel like that's what we would call it. Even though the expedition
like going on adventures.
Yeah. The expedition was like walking down some train tracks and like,
That's what I mean. So much, there's like really sweet stuff in this movie that really could have worked if it were handled differently.
Yeah, the critics hated this movie.
I get it.
I want to read one more. This is the last one I'll read. This is from the
LA. Love this. Read them all. This is amazing.
This is from the LA Times, again, in 92, when it was released by someone named Kenneth Turin. He says, coming across radio flyer is like stumbling on a massive pile of debris in some desert locale. Are these the ruins of a once great and promising city, the traveler wonders? All that is left, perhaps, of a previously thriving civilization? Or was there never anything but junk here in the first place?
Whoa!
Wow.
Yikes!
Wow.
That's hysterical. Oh my god.
Yeah, he calls it a well-meaning failure, a muddled fantasy about child abuse that ponderously attempts to combine the grace of legend with the earnestness of a public service announcement.
Oof. That
Right?
is. I think I do think, and it is troublesome. I think this movie is well-meaning. I
Yeah.
think that's correct.
Yeah.
And is in a weird way a problem.
Yes. I fully agree.
Like, I don't think the movie thinks, because there are movies and shows, and like we talk about trauma porn as a real thing of like where you're just trying to like sort of cash in on exploiting a character. Like, I guess exploiting isn't the right word, but you know what I mean, of like you're really exploiting the viewer connection to a character, where it's like if you put them through enough bad stuff, they're gonna. But I don't think that's what this movie is trying to do.
No, it does feel like it was well intentioned, and I think that comes from the original script, not necessarily the treatment of it by the director.
Yeah, though I do think the fact that David Mickey Evans says like Richard Donner was kind to me. Like, I don't get the impression that Donner was like, I know how we'll make $1 million. You know what I mean? Like,
sure, yeah.
I was gonna say $1 million off of a movie. Like, it's, I think the script ended up being like $30 million or something, or the film.
Right,
budget.
and apparently he really wanted to direct this film. Like, it wasn't like he was like cynical about it.
Right, that's what I mean. It all feels like it comes from an earnest place all around. Weirdly, right. It just
he says
doesn't work.
At the end of this article, he says his strong desire to direct Radio Flyer indicates that he believes that he has a light magical touch as well, the kind Steven Spielberg showed in E.T., but he clearly does not.
But then also he directed Goonies.
I know. So he clearly does in some ways.
Like,
yeah.
Although I guess, I mean, one thing that is important about Goonies is those kids are much older. Like, I think that does make a difference.
And it's not playing with fantasy in the same way.
Right, exactly.
It's all in for everything that happens being fully real, you know? And so that simplifies things a bit. You're not balancing the same issues that you are here. You're also not dealing with economic issues, not like the parents in that movie are, if I remember correctly, quite sweet. They're not abusive or weird in any way. It's like
I don't think so.
The villain is the developers, which is a much simpler and easier lift in a film. I don't know, man. I will say I feel like my big takeaway from this movie was like, oh, little Andrea.
I know. Me too.
Like, oh.
What was wrong with you?
No, like, I get it. I was typing in a tree. I was up a tree with a typewriter. Like, I get it.
That's what I mean. Like, I think I probably watched this movie with I watched this movie the way David Mickey Evans would have wanted somebody to watch his movie.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that the movie does not.
Right.
And probably if I had seen this, if I hadn't been allowed to watch this until I was 13 because of the rating, there's no way. Like, I would have been like, this movie is. You would have been
too cynical at that point. To really buy into it.
Well, that's why Fisher can't. They say he can't fly. He was 14, so he was too old for the magic.
Right. So is there a perfect age to watch this movie at a perfect level of like childhood trauma to be able to bypass the worst parts? Yeah. Yes. I would say the answer to that is yes.
Is yes, yeah. And it's however old I would have been. I wonder how old I would have been when I saw this, because I guess I could have seen it. We went to the movies a lot when I was a kid, and I saw a lot of movies. Like, I don't think my mom was like, or my grandparents, whoever I would go with, were like reading reviews beforehand. I think we just saw whatever was out
there. Yeah.
And so there's a good chance I did see this in the theater, though it's also possible we rented it, when it came out or whatever.
Yeah.
But either way, I was much younger than like 10. I was probably 7 or 8 at the oldest when I saw this movie. So.
Right. The number of times in my notes I asked the question, is he dead? My notes are chaos, but within the first few lines I wrote, is his brother dead? A few lines later, is he dead? And then a number of other times.
Were you questioning, like, in this scene, did the child die? Or were you questioning, like, is this a movie about a man telling himself the fiction of a living brother?
No. It was literally like, before I knew any of the fantasy elements or anything, it was like, Tom Hanks is talking to his kids about his brother. Is his brother dead?
Okay, yeah. No, he flew away and traveled the world.
Right, sure. Okay.
I read something, I'm going to throw this out, and I think, again, this isn't what the movie intended. It's interesting to think of it, though. If Mikey created Bobby as a way to deal with the violence that he was receiving.
It's definitely not the intention of the movie, but it's interesting that because they couldn't settle on what this movie was doing, it leaves room for that interpretation.
Yeah, and there's a scene that this person pointed to that I was struck by when I was watching it, but there was so much going on that I didn't spend any time unpacking it at the time. But when I read this blog, which I think is...
That's where I found this too.
About the scene with the bullies when he goes to play football. So this is ramblingfilm.blogspot.com. This is from a post in 2010. They point to a particular scene, and it's the one when Bobby gets a fairly severe beating. It's when Mikey leaves to go play football with the bullies for some reason. It makes no sense.
Don't trust the bullies, dude. What's wrong with you?
Right.
They're
it makes no
sense.
Exactly. But somebody said, so this person wrote, I've heard theories that when Mikey is being beat up during the game of football, he is playing with the neighborhood kids. It's just his way of handling the beatdown from the king.
Oh, interesting.
That it was that it was such a severe beating that he couldn't dissociate or distance himself from it. So he had to create in his memory or in the moment, whatever, another reason for it. Because they're both being...
Yeah, at the same time.
And something else is that you never, other than that first scene on the fishing trip, the first time the king hits Mikey, or the first time the king hits Bobby, you never actually see him lay hands on Bobby the rest of the movie. It all happens off camera.
Right.
So it's interesting that the only time we really see any of the kids receive any physical violence is from the bullies.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. And I think it's funny that, like, you could really support this theory with a lot of evidence from the movie, and I don't think this is at all the intention of the movie.
I know.
But you can definitely make it work.
It makes me want to teach this in a class where I tell students, like, authorial intent doesn't matter. Like, for our purposes, if you want to analyze a film, if you can find textual evidence, you can make that claim.
Yeah.
Like, this movie is a perfect example of that.
I know.
And you can talk about whether or not the author was successful in what they were trying to communicate, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah. I also think you could do a class on this being the inverse of the Barbie movie.
Say more?
I don't know if I can. I haven't gotten there yet. I only watched the Barbie movie last night.
We'll check back in next week.
Well, because the Barbie movie is a female-driven movie where the patriarchy is gone in Barbie land, but not in the real world. So it's engaging with ideas of the patriarchy, but it's from a female perspective. And the female characters are dolls, but are somehow more fleshed out than the woman in this movie. I could get there.
I love this.
The patriarchy hurts us all.
Jodie's argument is that the Barbie movie is a direct response to the issues raised and created in and by Radio Flyer.
Okay, there's no child abuse in the Barbie movie, just FYI.
Are there any children in the Barbie movie?
Yes.
Okay.
The main child in the Barbie movie is an early teen, like a 14 or 15-year-old.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I won't say any more than that. I don't want to ruin it for those that have yet to get to see the Barbie movie.
I'll make a plan to see it this week. I would say maybe listeners, if you're planning on seeing it, you should also see it this week, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. We'll see. We'll see what happens next week.
I do think that there's some interesting, like, some of the things we've talked about in our other conversations about movies and about Yellowjackets, about female protagonists and things like that, and the patriarchy, you know.
Mhm.
I feel I'm so tired of saying that fucking word, but there's just no other way to describe it in shorthand.
Yeah.
Does interesting things. Greta Gerwig does interesting things with this in the Barbie movie, I think.
Cool.
I don't know that it's always successful, but like I said in my text to you, I fully enjoyed it and laughed a lot. There's some really great visual gags in it too.
I saw a tweet that was like, people are criticizing the Barbie movie for being like intro to feminism, like 101.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people need.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's like,
I mean, the way that they really kind of like lay it on thick in that movie, there were two kids next to me, two apparently sisters, who were like, I would say maybe 15 and 12. And I was like, yeah,
it's for
this
you.
is for you. Like, this is a nice way of laying it out for you that you will understand. You won't get all the jokes, but you know,
but that's okay.
That's okay. You'll hear the 40-something women laughing at the, you know, guy playing the guitar at them. And then someday a guy will play a guitar at you and you'll get it. Because you know that's going to happen to those 15 and 12-year-old girls. Someday a guy is going to play a guitar at them.
It won't be Ryan Gosling, though.
No.
I love him. I know everybody does. I know. But I love him so much.
He's so in on the whole joke. Like, to the point where it's like he's playing with it in such fun ways.
It is almost a shame that the Barbie movie is sort of like has become the Ken Ryan Gosling movie, though. I will say there is something a little like about that.
I was just listening this morning in my tradition of recommending other podcasts. I was just listening to Las Culturistas this morning, and they're talking about this exact thing, about how Margot Robbie is fucking incredible and carries this whole movie and is the most perfect person you could ever imagine to play this role. She's so incredibly good at it, and she carries it. And she just, like, the physicality that she produces and all of this, she's amazing in it. And everybody is like, Ryan Gosling. And it's like, yeah, he's great. But she's the whole movie. And she carries it in such an amazing way. Like, Margot Robbie is perfect in this movie.
She also seems lovely.
Yeah. She's also the most physically perfect for this role.
Yeah.
Like, this movie just loves looking at Margot Robbie's face. And like, so do I. Like, it's a perfect marriage.
She has a very kind face. Like, I feel like I trust her. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Every interview I've seen of her and Ryan, but of her, she seems so genuine and warm.
Yes.
I don't know if I've
also,
I talked
Kate
about
McKinnon is in this fucking movie.
Oh yeah.
I love Kate McKinnon.
Yeah, she's great too.
She's weird Barbie.
I realize she has suffered a little bit by being so directly connected in my mind with Ellen DeGeneres because she does that incredible impression of her.
Yeah.
But Ellen is such a sack of crap.
Yeah.
That's not Kate McKinnon's fault. I have to remind myself sometimes. Yeah. But my like gut reaction when you said Kate McKinnon for half a second was like, oh. And then I was like, no, wait, I like her.
No, she's like great. Her weird Barbie is... I'm excited for you to see this movie. There's so many fun visual gags in it. We'll definitely talk about it a little bit, even though it's been talked to death already.
I think that's okay. People haven't heard our take on it. So
no, I'm sure there's a Victorian novel that we can connect it to. Or a children's book. I do need you to read Gone Away Lake, though.
I will.
I'm like very excited for you to read that. I might go reread it.
Maybe that'll be our first book club book. Just kidding. Someday it's going to happen.
I have a copy somewhere.
Listeners, when we have 5 million downloads, we'll start a Patreon.
Oh, God.
And it'll be a book club. So just get to listening.
Okay. Yeah, tell your friends. Get us to 5 million
downloads.
Get us that sock money.
That's right. I want that Bombas money. Ooh, I want them Bombas socks. I don't even want the money. I just want the socks.
My brother got me those for Christmas one year. They're so good.
They're great socks. This podcast is not sponsored by Bombas.
It's not sponsored by anybody.
No.
But we like those socks.
But it could be.
It could be. Okay. Have we said enough about this movie? I think we have. I think we really kind of like pulled apart the most important, but also like the most specific to us parts of this movie.
Yeah. And if we missed anything,
Tell
let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to hear from other people who watched this movie, who hadn't seen it like me and watched it as an adult and were like, I would love to know other people's reactions to it, because mine was like more complicated than I thought it was going to be, especially the first, like, I watched the first 15-20 minutes of this movie and I was like, oh no, Andrea. But I got it.
Sorry.
No, I got it.
All right. So I think that was Radio Flyer again. Would love to hear from everybody. We'll tell you where to find us at the end of this episode, that we're pretty easy to track down.
Yes.
We'll do our little bits of housekeeping. I have one review, a really lovely one I want to share. But before we do all of that, Jodie, do you want to let us know? You're already laughing. What we're going to watch next week?
I'm laughing.
Let me ask. Well, hey, before let me set you up.
Okay.
Which movie exploring themes of trauma and child abuse and alcoholism did you pick for us to watch? That's what I picked. So now it's your turn. Which one did you pick?
So I picked a movie about dancing.
Good. I think
I picked a movie about girls and dancing and TV dance contests. I picked Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Andrea, which I'm so excited that you haven't seen.
Boys just want to escape their alcoholic stepfathers.
And girls just want to have fun.
Girls just want to have fun.
Yes. Perfect. So this is where our generation gap actually comes in handy.
Yeah, I know. If you had asked me what I know about this movie, I might have said Sarah Jessica Parker's in it. I think I did know that.
Right.
I think now I know a little bit more because I just Googled it, but that's it. So set us up.
Okay. So I'm not going to say too much.
Mm-hmm.
Girls Just Want to Have Fun, 1985. Billed as an American romantic comedy dance film, which is a category we all clearly know and love. Sarah Jessica Parker, Helen Hunt, and Shannon Doherty.
Another Shannon Doherty.
Yeah, another Shannon Doherty. This is very young Shannon Doherty playing the annoying little sister character.
No, is Christian Slater also in this one?
I can't believe it, but no, he's not. Very sad about that.
Yeah.
But it is a romp, I would say.
Ooh, love a romp.
It's a romp.
Last week was a hoot. I don't know what this week was. Next week's a romp.
Last week was a hoot. This week was depression, and next week is a romp. Yeah.
Last week was a hoot. This week was a huh?
Yeah.
And next week is a romp.
Yes. And so this is sort of the 80s version of Dirty Dancing, I would say. Even though Dirty Dancing, I think, came out in the 80s. But this was like the 80s. Wait, when did Dirty Dancing come out?
When is Dirty Dancing set is the
question.
That's
the thing. So that's what I'm trying to say. So Dirty Dancing came out in 87, actually. So maybe Dirty Dancing was inspired by Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I don't think that's the case. But Dirty Dancing was set in the 60s, I believe. Mm-hmm. This is an 80s movie set fully in the 80s. So if you're excited,
by Sarah Jessica Parker's hair,
oh
I think,
my God,
on this cover.
And it's also a sort of Catholic school girl, like rebellion kind of movie. There's nuns in it. Like there's televised dance contests, which if you're not a child of the 80s, I hate to tell you was actually a thing.
A whole thing.
Like Dance Party USA was a television show I watched with my friend Amy when I was growing up. So yes, if we depressed you this week, hopefully also it was enjoyable because I enjoyed talking about it.
It's my favorite way to be depressed.
Yeah. So next week,
you guys, you found us because you like Yellowjackets.
Exactly.
I think most of you are listening because of that. So I'm not worried.
Yeah, I think they're more likely to enjoy Radio Flyer than Girls Just Want to Have Fun. But
when was the last time you saw this movie?
Maybe 2 years ago.
Okay.
I've seen it recently. Not super recently, but enough that I remember it pretty clearly.
My guess is a lot of the movies will be ones we've seen more recently just because of how you and I watch things. I think Billie Jean and Radio Flyer were maybe outliers in that way. Yeah. That we just kind of...
Yeah, I've definitely watched this movie within the last 5 years, I'll say. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm reading the summary again, and I'm like so excited to watch this.
Oh, yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, it is free. You can find it on Tubi and some of those other free. Just Google Girls Just Want to Have Fun 1985.
Yeah, I'm way pro Tubi. The network I started out on has a movie rewatch podcast that they try to only pick movies
Oh,
you can
that's
get for free
cool.
on Tubi. Tubi's reliable. There are ads, but it's not like every 2 minutes.
Right.
It's totally reasonable. So,
And if you have Amazon Prime, if you're a terrible person that supports Jeff Bezos like I am and wishes that I wasn't, it's on there for free if you have Amazon Prime also.
Cool.
With no commercials.
And also, I think you said the Roku channel. And then it's also a pretty cheap rental from like Redbox and stuff. You can get it for between $2 and $4 depending on where you rent from.
The music
I think I made you all pay like $4.99 if you watch Radio Flyer.
$3.99.
So sorry. $3.99. Okay.
Yeah. So that is our movie for next week. I'm already excited to watch this movie again, even though I've definitely seen it within the last 5 years. It is.
I'm excited.
Talk about indelible. Like, okay, things that you may or may not know about me, Andrea, and also our listeners. I have to frame this by saying that I only wear basically like black and denim. I had like severe bangs and lots of tattoos in grad school. Like that is.
I think you and I first connected because we felt like we were probably the like. So I'm really excited for what you're about to say, because I think when you and I first connected, we were like, oh, we're like the weird offbeat kind of people who listen. I mean, we met through New Jersey's World, but I just mean like who had a lot of those things in common. Like I think one of our first conversations was about Mallrats, for example, that kind of thing.
And I related real hard to Daria. Like, you know, I'm a pretty dry person. I was a cheerleader from 2nd to 8th grade. I was captain of the dance team in 5th grade.
2nd to 8th grade is a long chunk of time to be.
And Saddlebrook took cheerleading very seriously. I went to the NCA camp one year, National Cheerleading Association camp. It was also when I realized I needed to stop cheerleading. That was in 8th grade, but we were very.
But it's in there.
We were very good. It is in my DNA. I was captain of the dance team because even though I had no friends and was not popular, I was the best dancer on the cheerleading squad. So
it wasn't a popularity contest.
No, it was merit-based.
You took it very seriously.
It was merit-based. I took it very seriously. I was also in gymnastics. I was a swing dancer in my 20s. Like I have a very, very strong like dance background. Not that I was ever wonderful at it. I was fine. I was acceptable. It was great when I was in 5th grade, you know, but so this is the other side of my personality that I'm really excited to.
I love this.
Revisit.
This is very exciting for me.
Yeah. The final. I'll talk about it after, but the final scene or number in this movie was very important to me as a dance person.
Oh, I genuinely can't wait. I'm so excited to watch this movie, and
it's going to be really fun.
All about how this contributes to your
also,
cultural makeup.
It has 4.8 stars on Amazon, so I'm not the only person that loves this movie.
Well, it's got 2 out of 4 on Roku, so we'll.
Ooh, okay. Wait, what's its Rotten
What's
Tomatoes?
the Rotten Tomatoes?
Oh, not good. 36%. But only 14 votes. That's not a representative sample.
Oh, that seems really low.
Oh, you know why? Okay. The tomato meter is 36%. The audience score is 77%.
Okay.
That's a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of care less about critical reception of a movie called Girls Just Want to Have Fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'll be interested to.
Right.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. I'll drop a link on the where to stream, but you can find it lots of places.
Somebody referred to it on Rotten Tomatoes as a wonky pop culture time capsule, which is, I think, appropriate.
Ooh, I love that. That everything you're saying is making me more excited to watch this movie.
Okay. So that's next week.
That's next week. I'm going to wrap up this week the way we always do. I have a new 5-star review that I want to share. I already shared it on Instagram because I read it and like teared up a little bit and then shared it with you. And it's just like, it has been so nice to hear that people are enjoying this show when we're talking about Yellowjackets, for sure.
Yeah.
And that like people who listen to all of the Yellowjackets podcasts, when they listen to ours, tend to really like it.
Yeah.
I was a little nervous about the off season, to be totally honest, because now you're just kind of,
it's just us.
It's just us.
Movies.
Yeah.
That mean a lot to us. Yeah.
This review from Complex Junkie, that we recently got really means so much. So I'm just going to share that. They said, I'm so happy to have found a link to this on Reddit at the beginning of the second season. Every episode feels like I'm having a discussion with friends. Even if you're just looking for a great Yellowjackets podcast, I very much encourage you to stick around for their off-season content.
Yay.
I could literally listen to these hosts talk for days.
That's so sweet.
Which is good because we often do talk
yes.
for days.
Yes, I've said before that these are conversations that Andrea and I would be having anyway. It's just that we decided to put them on a microphone and hope other people wanted to hear them too.
It's a sickness I have. Although I say that, but this is the first, that's the other thing, is I maybe have said this already, but this is the first podcast I started and wasn't invited on by someone else. This is the first podcast where I was like, oh, I have something that I want to talk about. And so I have to say it's also the only one that hasn't become my day job in some way or another. It's just what I'm doing because I really love talking with you about these movies. Yeah. And my listeners have been
It's also very hard for me to watch you say sincere things with a giant buffalo head behind you.
The buffalo and I are both crying.
God.
So thank you all so much. The reviews mean so much.
And we'll have a good giggle next week. I'm sure we'll find some way to make it slightly depressing or about the patriarchy, because I guarantee you that's in there. But
is it set in Jersey?
I wish it was set in Jersey.
Oh, I can't wait to figure out what our
somewhere.
Figure out what our Jersey connection is. We'll get
there's definitely a Jersey connection.
Okay.
There's got to be.
I'm sure we'll find one.
So so follow us on WatchersPodNJ on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow me. My art account is Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM on Instagram. Andrea, where can they find you?
I'm at AQ Andrea Q on Twitter and Instagram. I'm more active on Instagram.
Yeah, it's still Twitter.
I'm never calling it anything else. You could go ahead, buddy. And
do whatever
you can always email us at WatchersPodNJ. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else. But I think Apple Podcasts is the only one where you can really also leave a review. And if you do that, we love to share them on the podcast. It makes us both very happy.
We're just doing this because we want to. Like, we don't have that sock money yet. We're just having fun. So we appreciate it.
Yeah, so give us a listen. Or give us a listen. You are listening. That was a weird thing to say. So thank you for listening is what I think I meant to say. Yeah. This has been The Watchers. I have been Andrea.
And I am still Jodie. And we will see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.